College football took a major gut punch today, as it appears at least one Power 5 conference will not play football this fall. There are a lot of moving pieces, so let's get right into it and bring in a college football insider. He's CBS Sports College Football writer Ben Kercheval. Ben, I appreciate you coming on. It appears Big Ten is out. We heard the Pac-10 might not be too far behind. What's going on, and how did we get here so quickly?
Yeah, so it's kind of a white smoke situation going on with the Big Ten and college football as a whole. Obviously, you have a lot of reports. Dan Patrick was actually the first one to say that they're going to vote to not play college football, but you're getting pushback on that. And I think this is always kind of a fascinating time because you get these little trial balloon moments. Like, okay, we're really considering canceling the football season for the fall. Let's kind of throw that out there, see how that responds. And it's just, I think even starting on late Sunday night when you had the "We Want to Play" hashtag start up with Trevor Lawrence and all those players, all of a sudden it's this tremendous pushback. Jim Harbaugh issuing a statement, Ryan Day, Scott Frost. I think it's very clear that everybody wants to play. I mean, I want them to play. Everybody wants football to happen, but it's not really a matter of want to. It's can you make this happen? And that is a very layered and convoluted issue that it is different from conference to conference, partially because, you're in different parts of the country. This virus has impacted states on different levels, all over the place. So it's just very hard to get some kind of uniformity on this. And so I do think that the Big Ten is very seriously considering not playing. That's something that we've heard on the back end for a very long time. I think it's the same thing with the Pac-12, SEC, Big 12, ACC. All of those, I think absolutely there's a line in the sand there. It's again, can you make this happen? And there are so many voices in the room that you're bound to get all different types of responses on that.
Can the Big Ten coaches that are standing up right now, Jason Day and Harbaugh, and you said Frost as well, can they actually move the needle on this topic?
Good question. At the end of the day, probably not. You'd like to maybe think that there's some strength in numbers, but Ryan Day is not making that decision. Jim Harbaugh is not making that decision. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, I thought his statement was really interesting. He pointed out all these facts from their testing and tracing at Michigan over the past couple of months. 11 positives out of almost 900 tests, none within the last, several weeks or, whatever it was, none within their coaching staff. But just because things are great at Michigan, I mean, you don't have to look very far. Michigan State shut down, quarantined its entire football team because they had some unexpected positives after they ran around the tests. Rutgers, still in the same conference, when it seems like ages ago the Big Ten actually released its schedule, but that actually was delayed in part because Rutgers had an outbreak on its team. So when you have coaches say, look, our players are preparing, we're preparing, we want this to happen, we feel good, we feel safe in our environment, I'm not denying that part is true in certain circles. It's whether that can be replicated on a massive level, and that's the part that is sometimes sort of hard to see there, sort of a forest for the trees situation. And so long answer short, no, I don't think that they have that actual capability to do it. I do think, though, that if you're a president trying to make these decisions and there's pressure coming from all different sides and you're fighting sort of a multi-front war on this, yes, cumulatively that could end up being a factor.
Indiana football had that offensive lineman, and I'm drawing a blank on his name at the moment, but he was very sick. Do you think that plays a role in the Big Ten's decision-making, knowing their situation?
Yeah, it should. He had some pretty severe, I think, effects involving his heart, if I'm not mistaken. His mom posted a message on Facebook, and there were some pretty, gruesome effects from that, even though he survived. And so much when we talk about COVID, it's, life or death. And obviously the death rate from a percentage standpoint is very low. And when we talk about young, healthy athletes, we think, okay, that probably means that they're even lower. Well, you can have pre-existing conditions. You can be an offensive lineman in this case who is technically considered obese, even though he's healthy and athletic. Those are things that you absolutely have to take into consideration. And here's what I think a lot of people really need to understand about this. Obviously, there are dangers with football. Head injuries. I mean, it's a dangerous, violent sport. And so no matter what happens, you're running a risk. But this is a novel thing that's been introduced that people aren't, no one's asking for this. It's not even just the players. It's everyone else associated with it. And when that happens, your threshold for error is very, very low. Let's say hypothetically one football player dies because he contracts COVID and they played a football season. I mean, you have to, as a president, as an athletic director, you have to explain to that family why there was a green light. And for us to talk about it, it's inconsequential. For us to talk about it on social media means nothing. We can jabber on and on until we're blue in the face. There are people who have to make very real decisions about this. And when it's someone's life, long-term health, safety, those things absolutely have a weight, even if that percentage is considered to be very, very low.
SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey tweeted out within, I think, the last hour or so about just being patient. And the SEC is the one conference that's really kicked the can down the road and pushed their start date back to late September. Do you think there's a chance other conferences are going to follow that lead?
Well, I think every conference is kind of in it for themselves at this point. If there's any kind of communication, it's really to sort of see what everyone else is doing. But there are a lot of people on a lot of islands at this point. I will give the SEC this. They have been pretty steadfast in how they've approached this, as much as you can be in this type of situation. They've really expanded out how they want to do the preseason practices. They were pretty deliberate about going to conference-only schedule. They were very deliberate about starting the season in late September, early October, which I don't know that there was a right time to do all of this, but certainly that buys you a little bit of time to see if our statewide mask mandates are starting to work, if people are starting to take it a little bit more seriously from a sort of a general population standpoint. So I think they've done the right thing, but for everyone else, ACC, Big 12, Pac-12, Group of Five conferences, I mean, whoever it is, at the end of the day, they're just trying to keep their head above water. So I think they're going to do what fits their situation the best. For the SEC, that means waiting a little bit more.
I don't want to say anything can blindside us in 2020 at this point because nothing can, but we were not talking about this idea that football would be canceled a week ago. What changed in such a short period of time?
Yeah, that's a good question because I don't know that a whole lot markedly has changed. But I think every week that we get closer to all of this actually unfolding and coming to fruition, the more painstakingly evident it is that whatever plan college football did have is tenuous. Nothing about this is rock solid. So the closer we get to it, the more there is a reality that this might be really, really difficult to pull off. So because it's not like we were great as a country a week ago and now suddenly we're fine, or excuse me, we're bad. It's been the same for a while now. I do wonder, and I don't have any specific insight on this, but I do wonder with players starting to speak up a little bit more and just the general power struggle and imbalance that this sport kind of has, I do wonder if that sort of plays a role in a more of a willingness to potentially punt on the season. But again, you're talking about the Big Ten, Pac-12 might be doing this, but other conferences might not be. So I think it's really just comes down to the closer you get to this. It's like if you haven't been working on a school project and it's due the next day, you go, oh crap, we have a whole bunch of stuff that we now have to figure out.
It's interesting you mentioned the power struggle. We want to play hashtag and the players supporting the idea of playing It's grown to be a lot more than just we want to play football. It's almost grown into a precursor to unionizing, is how it feels. Where are we headed, and is this a real thing that could be on the cusp, or are we just still so far away? And weirdly enough, it seems like the president, Donald Trump, supporting this idea of the We Want to Play, which again kind of feels like a precursor to unionizing, the way they wrote their write-up.
Yeah, Trump didn't read that whole graphic if he's treating the support for that. I mean, because the Players Association part of it was the real standout bullet point at the bottom. That being said, I think we need to be very careful about using the term union. I mean, it's okay in passing, you can kind of talk about it, but they mentioned Players Association very specifically. To have a union, to have a collective bargaining agreement, to have an actual seat at a negotiating table, that is a very, very convoluted subject that there are smarter people than me. Allison Jessup, I think she's called Ruling Sports on Twitter. If people don't know her, they should look her up. She's very, very insightful on these types of things. Really laid out kind of a laundry list of why that would be so difficult. And a lot of the reasons kind of go back to what happened. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. Northwestern football players had made a push to start a union, and there are a number of roadblocks associated with that: public versus private universities, right to work states, things like that, that make the actual term unionization very, very difficult, at least without the expressive, willingness of the NCAA to move forward with something like that. That being said, I think having more of a voice at the table, having some kind of maybe unofficial representation, I think is a good thing for athletes. I mean, it's been a long time coming for them. I don't think you can ethically move forward in this pandemic asking them, even if they want to play, even if players want to play, I don't think it's right without paying them, without giving them access to their NIL rights, to say, okay, you need to go out and play football for us to save us. I mean, that ethically is wrong.
We were talking to Ben Kercheval of CBS Sports. He's a college football writer. Really, one last topic I want to talk to you about, Ben. The Power 5 conferences have had no problem kind of flexing their muscle and flexing their strength. Does this feel like a precursor to a furthering split in college football? It just feels like they're okay making all their own decisions, and they don't care what anyone else thinks.
Well, they also are apparently capable of making decisions solely by themselves without consulting any other power conferences. So, I've never been a big believer, until recently, I've never been a big believer that the Power 5 conferences were going to break away from the NCAA. The basic reasoning being that presidents and chancellors, the people who make up the NCAA membership, are so invested in abiding, or not necessarily abiding by the rules, but making sure that other people abide by the rules, that breaking away from that seemed very counterintuitive. My colleague Dennis Dodd, who has covered college football forever, knows more about these types of things than I think just about anybody on the topic, has actually been the opposite. He's been convinced for a long time that the Power 5 would break away from the NCAA on all of this. So I think the things that we've seen over the past couple of months, not even just about COVID-19, but about NIL rights, working more with legislators on those types of topics, those have given me reasons to think that it's more possible. That being said, everybody clearly has a big problem governing on a massive level. I mean, to say that they're going to break away from the NCAA, well, they better have a better plan in place, because everything that we've seen over the past week is, okay, when things dissolve quickly, everyone starts running for the hills themselves. So it's possible. I think it's more probable now than it's ever been, but be sure this is a very difficult thing for them to get a handle on themselves.
He's Ben Kercheval. He's a college football writer for CBS Sports. Ben, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about the latest in college football, a topic that's going to be changing, I think, by the minute for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.